Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Season 1, Episode 3 of the Dozer Tactical Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Mendoza, and thanks for tuning in. For today's episode, we have with us a true warrior. He has fought by my side since the days of high school football and the grueling struggles of the offensive and defensive lines to the strenuous tasks of protecting our people and this great nation. Please welcome Mr. Wyatt Copeland to the show. Wyatt, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So Wyatt, we received some feedback from our audience, and they asked us to share some background information about each guest. With that being said, can you share with our listeners some of your achievements and most notable actions in the past few years?
I've gotten to work on a couple real patients. 50 cal round blew up in the chamber, peppered a dude's leg, stuck him with some ertapenem, basic antibiotic. And another guy, he was jumping from the airplane, and when he landed, his rubber ducky, which is just a plastic M4, actually landed on the ground, buttstock down and barrel up, and caught him right in the tailbone and broke his tailbone. So I got to work on him too with the provider. It's pretty cool.
And you also, when we were talking offline, you also mentioned that you have your airborne wings, correct?
Yeah, that's totally forgot about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for your service. I really appreciate your sacrifices. So with that being said, let's begin the show.
All right, y'all. For this podcast, we're talking about news articles, firsthand experiences, preparedness tips, tactics of everyday disasters and emergencies. Any articles, gear, training courses discussed in this episode will be provided in the links in the episode description.
Please leave us a review and let others know what your thoughts were about this podcast. Also, consider supporting the podcast by clicking on the support link in the show description. You can now find us on over 10 different podcast platforms. So if you enjoy this podcast, please share us on your social media.
All right, Dan, let's tell our listeners what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, Wyatt, today our topic of conversation is going to be about emergency medicine / medical career fields in the military. We will provide an overview of the various medical jobs and their respective branches, how to start your path to become a provider, and finally, discussing some advanced medical tactics that are used when treating patients on and off the battlefield. So turn up the volume, get comfortable, and prepare for another exciting episode of the Dozer Tactical Podcast. Let's begin by breaking down the various medical jobs, what they do, and what branch they belong to.
Okay, so I'm a combat medic, 68 Whiskey at the Army, so that's kind of my bread and butter. We're EMTs, first and foremost. But the cool thing about being a medic in the Army is, even though you're an EMT, you do stuff that even paramedics can't do in this world. So I can do a crike. I can put a chest tube in if I get the proper training and my provider actually okays it. We get to basically just think of it this way. If you're an EMT in the civilian world, we can do what you do, plus what paramedics can do, and more, with just the EMT license. That's really the cool thing, and that's what I really like, because once you get out of the Army or do whatever you want, maybe you decide you don't want to be a medic, you still have that medical knowledge, and so it just makes it easier. So if you want to progress, become a paramedic, it just makes it that much easier, because you actually have to work with medications constantly. So that's one of the big pluses, I'd say.
Another one that we have is the Air Force Aerospace Medical Technicians. These guys are obviously with the Air Force, and they are the brother to the Army combat medics. The only main difference is that they don't actually do combat. So these are going to be your guys that are working in the hospitals. They're doing their clinicals. They're going to be doing a lot of the basic medical care necessities. So taking your vitals, doing a lot of the paperwork, asking you a lot of the basic questions. That's what these guys primarily do. And then we have the next step up from that, which is actually the Air Force aeromedical evacuation technicians. And that is what I currently am right now in the Air Force. And those are the guys that are essentially flight medics, flight paramedics. They work with the flight nurses, and you go through and you pick up patients, you stabilize the patients, and then you make sure that they get transported to their nearest MTF or medical treatment facility. So up next, we have the Navy Corpsman. Wyatt, can you tell us a little bit about the Navy?
Navy Corpsman. I got to meet a lot of those guys at AIT. Pretty cool guys. I mean, all the medical personnel that I've really met have been really cool people. They, as far as I know, they're medics, same as me. The only difference is they are either with Marines or they're on the ships with Navy. Same amount of training. I believe they also get their EMT. Don't fact check me on that.
Yes, they do.
Okay. Oh, all right. Perfect. So yeah, they get their EMT as well. And you can actually, Navy Corpsmen, they have also been what's what I'm looking for? Attached to like SEAL units before, but you'd have to go through the Special Forces schooling to actually be a Special Forces medic. But you can be attached to a Special Forces unit.
Up next, we have the Air Force Pararescuemen. So these guys are known as the elite medical operators of the world, or the most elite, I should say. These are the brave men who jump into any situation. They'll tackle on any combat situation. They'll be deployed with Special Forces units, Navy SEALs, Delta, you name it. And these are the guys that are solely responsible for providing the medical care and the immediate trauma care that they need right there on the battlefield. So these guys, I'm sure there's plenty of movies and books about them. Not as much as the Navy SEALs, but they're pretty well known as the most elite medical providers in the world. So finally, we have on our list of medical providers in the military, we have the Special Forces Medical Sergeant.
So Special Forces Medical Sergeant, first things first, you got to go through SF school. And SF school, all it is this is the basics for it. You're just embracing the suck for a good couple weeks. And once you pass that, it's a lot harder than I make it sound. But once you pass that, you go through this thing called the Q course. And that's when they really start to find out, what your job is and what you want to do. There's 18 X-rays, which are, guns a-blazing. Then there's 18 Charlies is commo guys. 18 Delta, that's your Special Forces sergeant, medical sergeant. And part of their training, from what my sergeant, who's actually going into it, has told me, is they legit practice on a living goat. They have to get it till it's close to dead, and then they have to keep it alive, bring it, nurse it back up, and then it's just kind of a continuous process. And that's the whole training of trying to get them into the mindset of, when you're out there, man, you got to make sure that you can keep this guy alive for as long as it is necessary before we can evac him out or medevac him out.
That's a great point, Wyatt. I think a lot of people, especially when they're just looking into becoming a medical provider in the military, I think a lot of people have this assumption that once you become a medical provider, you can just fix anyone right there on the spot. You just give them some medicine, you patch them up, and they're good to go. They can continue the fight. But I think it's important for them to realize that, this isn't like a video game. You can't just do that. When you are a medical provider, especially in a combat situation, your job is not actually to get them back into the fight, although that, does happen and can happen. But what, I want to put out there just as true information is that you're actually just trying to stabilize the patient and you're trying to get them out of the situation. Now, it depends on your mission. It depends on, your rules of engagement and all that. But typically you're going to stabilize a patient, get them out of there as soon as possible. You don't just slap a Band-Aid on them, give them some morphine and say, all right, you're good to go back in the fight. So I just want to put that out there and share that with you guys. And I think Wyatt, can definitely attest to that. So just don't get the wrong idea that you're going to go in, become a provider, and you're going to be saving lives and people are going to be jumping back up on their feet, getting back into the fight. That's the exact opposite of how it works. It does happen, and those situations are very specific, but 90% of the time, trying to stabilize the patient, get them to maintain homeostasis, and then get them out of there.
You got to do everything that you can to stop the bleeding, maintain an airway. Those are like the two main things, your ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. If they don't have an airway, you don't have a patient. If they don't have any blood, you don't have a patient. So you got to maintain those two things, stabilize them, get them to the next echelon of care, which is, more than likely an officer.
So now we've talked about, and we have a little bit more context about the types of medical positions in the military and what their mission is. Now let's do what we can to help our listeners prepare for their journey so they can start their path to becoming a medical provider in the military.
So it's really simple, honestly. Just if you go onto Amazon, it's really easy. You can find a Ranger Medic Handbook. Again, this is like more specifically towards people who want to be combat medics, because again, that's my bread and butter. Ranger Medic Handbook. It's a great tool, Army or not. It's a great tool. Just make sure you get the newest version, because something about medicine is it is constantly changing. It might say, give this guy 1 gram of TXA today, and then a week later it's like, actually no, we want to give you 2 grams of TXA. That's exactly how it's going to be. So medicine is always changing. So make sure you get the most recent. There's a couple apps. There's the EMS app. It's pretty nice. There's a free version, and then there's a paid version. Paid version just gives you access to more questions and stuff like that. Then there's a nurse's drug handbook. Very good thing to know. It has every kind of medication that you would ever need to know in it. You just type in the medication and it'll give you a list of the doses, the routes, when to take it, how to take it, which is route. It gives you the 5 R's, right? Route, right dose, right time, right patient. It makes it really simple. There's the what's it called? The Deployed Medicine app. Deployed Medicine app is something that specifically combat medics use as a guideline. It doles out our entire trauma lane, which is, it's kind of like a guideline. It's just, this is what we want you to do. This is how we think it's best to keep the patient alive or the casualty. And so
yeah.
we follow that.
Yeah, I just want to say that's a great point, is looking at the Deployed Medicine. That, just so you guys know, is an app that is approved by the Committee of Tactical Combat Casualty Care. And that, like he was saying, just gives you all the basics of, it's essentially a guideline. So how you do buddy carries, how to do stop the bleed on serious issues, femoral arteries, just that kind of stuff. So that's a really, really good tool. I use that actually, and I know plenty of other people use it as well, with very high success rates in their actual pipeline.
Because this is the age of technology. You got to use what you got, and you're always going to have your phone on you for the most part. So if you got those apps, man, use them. What my very first line senior, what he told me was, if you got notes and you're quote unquote cheating on this trauma lane, hey, it's working, right? You have notes on you. If you flip out that notebook, you're like, hey, I want you to give this medication. Oh crap, I don't remember this medication. Flip it out, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. Put it back in your pocket. Boom, give the medication. You're using your resources. So that's another thing. Take really good notes. EMT school, don't take it lightly. And also, you can do really, really, really well in the EMT class and just completely bomb the NREMT. The NREMT is a whole nother beast. The questions, it'll give you, 4 answers. All of them sound right, but one of them is most right. So a little trick my stepdad taught me, who's a paramedic and also the medical administrator for the county up in Northern California. He said, read the question, and then when you read the answers, read it from the last answer to the first answer. Now it does something in your head, because when you read the answers, for A, B, C, and then D, your mind for some reason just wants to jump immediately to like, oh, it's B. But for some reason, your mind kind of rewinds itself when you go D, C, B, A. But I knew a guy who had a 70% average in the EMT class, and he passed it first go. So, and then I knew a person who had a 90%. They failed first go. They got it second time, but it just goes to show that the EMT class, yes, you want to pay attention, don't take it lightly, but also the NREMT is a whole separate thing. That's why you want that EMS app, and that's why you want the deployed medicine app. That's why you want the nurse's drug handbook app, because they will help lay out for you exactly what you need to know on top of what your EMT instructors do.
So prepare as much as possible so that you have the highest chance of success. So we went over a bunch of different applications to go over. So that is more of the mental aspect, the mentally preparing for the course or courses you're about to take. Talk to me a little bit about fitness preparation and what should our listeners prepare for physically when it comes to these various jobs.
Well, one main thing is with the PT test, it's in my opinion, it's really easy to pass, but it's harder to max. So what you want to do is you kind of want to focus on like a more well-rounded fitness regimen. Don't just constantly go, busting out the bench press because you want a huge chest. You want to make sure that you work on exercises that are specifically designed to help you in whatever is on that PT test. Like for the Army, we have a new PT test, and we have to do these hand extension push-ups. We have to do knee tucks on the pull-up bar. We have to do a sprint drag carry. We have to do a deadlift, a ball throw, and then a 2-mile run. So we basically took just the push-ups, sit-ups, and run to a whole 6 different courses. So now it works out your entire body. Whereas I think the Air Force, y'all are still doing push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, right?
Yeah, so that's the standard. The Air Force does the push-ups, sit-ups, and then the run, 1.5 mile run. But something I wanted to add on to that was that, you have your basic PT test for all the branches. And yes, it is important to start preparing for those to make sure that you're going to pass those and that you can maintain. But just keep in mind, if you're going to be going for something outside of that, which would be Special Forces, Medical Sergeant, you want to go Air Force Pararescue, you even want to go into a combat medic. All these jobs, they require a heightened level of fitness. So you can't get away with just doing the bare minimums. You have to go above and beyond and start preparing, I would say, honestly, about a year out. Start swimming, start doing pull-ups, lift some weights, do a lot of calisthenics, do a lot of running. You're going to need to do all these things because when you get to these special operations pipelines, it's not easy. They're not going to take it easy on you. And I will say the closest thing that you can do to that is watch videos on YouTube, talk to ex-special operators, talk to people who are out in the field and learn from them, because they're going to tell you what you're honestly going to go through. And we could tell you all day long what you will experience, but The bottom line is you just got to go well beyond the expectations. If you're told that you can max out at 71 push-ups, you need to start aiming for 80 push-ups, 90 push-ups. Sounds a little ridiculous, but the higher standard you hold yourself, the better you will do in all these courses, and the likelihood that you'll succeed is greatly increased.
Exactly. Tack on to that, I'm a bigger guy, so no one really expects me to run, but that's exactly why I constantly run, or at least used to before I had an accident and my knee is now busted. But I would run all the time. And whenever the PT test would come around, I was getting a 12-minute 2-mile run. And all these guys who are much skinnier than me, they look much more fit than me. These guys constantly go into the gym, look like they eat the plates. They're looking at me like, how can you run that fast? Well, it's because I'm setting a higher expectation for myself. Once I got to the 13-minute mark, I said, nah, that's too slow. I can go faster. Then I got to 12:45, 12:30, 12:14. Then I got down to that 12-minute 2-mile. I was like, man, still too slow. I got to go faster. So it's just all about pushing yourself, reaching that next goal, never being completely satisfied with, where you're at. You can be satisfied with where you're at. Just, you always want that little bit extra.
I think that's a wonderful point. You should always strive for more. Always stay hungry, because it'll benefit you in the long run. You don't ever want to settle and become complacent. So we talked about using the apps, trying to study, obtain that knowledge, watching videos, working on your fitness and working really hard, doing as much as you can to get physically prepared. Some other things that you're going to need to look out for is studying hard for the ASVAB, because it's not going to do you any good if you're doing all this physical preparation, you're studying EMT, but you can't pass an ASVAB. So Wyatt, do you have any advice for anyone who's just coming into the military and that's the first test that they have to take?
All right. Well, I have 2 lines actually, and you're probably in the same mindset as me. If you're coming straight out of high school, the ASVAB is just naturally going to be a little easier for you because you just got out of high school. All this knowledge is kind of fresh in your mind. The ASVAB is, for the most part, just pretty much basic, rudimentary stuff. I got some Algebra 2 questions on it, and it had already been, 4 years since high school for me, almost. And when I took the ASVAB, and Algebra 2, that was my bread and butter in high school. But all of a sudden, since I hadn't done it in so long, I couldn't remember. So if you're just coming out of high school, you still need to study. Don't get what Dan said, don't get complacent. Strive for better, strive for more. Stay hungry. But it's going to be a little easier for you. If you're, 4, 5, 6 years from high school, you haven't done any college, it's going to be a little harder. You're going to need to study a little harder than some.
Yeah. And I think the last little bit here that really we can help you guys out with in giving you some more knowledge is kind of go outside of what you normally would think and just start practicing on everything and anything. Start practicing on your leadership skills, your communication skills, how well you articulate, how well you listen. Go to the range. If you've never shot a gun before, you're going to have to shoot a gun in the military. I promise you that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be the military. So even if you are going into a position that, is not necessarily combat, you're still going to have to use a rifle or a pistol or both. So get some range practice in. Go out into your community. Yeah. Go out into your community and ask, ex-operators, ask ex-law enforcement, just talk to people and get an idea of what you're going to be looking at. There's no one else better to talk to than a veteran because they've went through it, they've lived it, and they obviously succeeded. So talk to them. And really, I think that's about all the prep that we can give you guys. So just as a recap, work on your fitness, almost a year out, start preparing for it, especially if you're going into some type of special operation or special forces. Study the ASVAB. do your best to start preparing for that test first before anything else. Start preparing for medical school. Use the apps that we provided here. The links will be in the description for all those applications. But use the apps on your smartphone and start studying. Start taking practice exams, testing yourself to make yourself that much more prepared and ready for the actual medical school. Go to the range, shoot some lead, get comfortable with the gun, get comfortable holding a gun and taking out the magazines and doing tactical reloads, getting on the ground, choosing your dominant eye, all that kind of stuff. Learn more about your branch. You find out if the medical job you're looking for is actually what you want, or is it just something that you've seen on TV or you've seen in a video game and that's something that you're trying to replicate. Because I promise you, it's not going to be fun for you if you're doing it just because it looks cool. Now, if you're doing a medical job because you want to help people, you want to save lives, you want to make an impact, you want to be, a frontline force in terms of medical issues, then that's a great reason. But if you saw a pararescue, event, or you saw an event where there was special forces medics out there, and you're like, oh man, that looks so cool, I want to do that, just because of how it looks, then you're on the wrong field. You're going to fail your pipeline, and it's not going to be worth it. And finally, ask questions in your medical community. Talk to ex-operators, talk to veterans, get on some forums, some Facebook pages, and ask away. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, and it's better to ask questions than to just think that you know all the answers and you end up failing anyway. So just remember, this was not an extensive list, but we hit all the main points for the right way to get selected for the job that you desire. Hopefully for our audience, this knowledge will be put to good use and help those who are serious about getting into this profession or any profession in the medical field. And now, listeners, a brief message from our sponsor. Welcome back, folks, to the Dozer Tactical Podcast. I'm joined today by special guest Wyatt Copeland, and we just finished going over the various medical roles in the military and how to begin your journey to get one of those positions. Now, let's change gears a little bit and talk about some advanced tactics that can be used once you become a military medic. Just to put a small disclaimer out there, these tactics and advice should only be used if you have been professionally trained and have received the proper licensure or credentials. Do not attempt these tactics unless you are trained to do so. The Dozer Tactical Podcast is not liable for any injuries or loss of life due to the techniques discussed in this podcast.
The real main thing that I never got at AIT was organizational skills. I know it sounds rudimentary and it's something that everybody feels like they got, but to be honest, when you're doing a trauma lane or you're actually working on someone, organization is key. If you don't know where something is, you're going to start going, you're going to be frantic. Your heart's going to start beating more. You're going to start making more mistakes. More mistakes means less chance that this person is going to survive. And it rolls downhill quick. So find a system that works for you in your aid bag. Get pouches, label it with some medical tape, anything. And another thing, make sure you have more, like, one or two, like combat gauze. If they say, you only need like 8, we'll grab 10. Because it's always good to have a little bit more, carry a little bit more weight, as long as you can fit it in your bag and not need it. And instead of just saying, oh, I'll take that 8, realizing, oh, crud, I actually needed 10 because this guy's bleeding a lot. And now you're out of luck. You got to improvise. You got to use something that's not as good, and it's not going to stop the bleeding as well. So the organization and making sure you have enough and a little bit more of the stuff that you're carrying. 1 IV bag? No. Carry 2 bags of solution. Carry 3 lines, because you will mess up on an IV stick. It happens all the time, even to people who have been in this field for years. Sergeants mess up. It's just going to happen. You're not always going to get it on the first try. You're not always going to be perfect at it. So just carry extra supplies just in case you mess up. And if you mess up, don't freak out. Don't wig out. Just keep going, stay calm, and just remember what you were taught. It will all come to you. Trust me. You might think it's gone out of your mind, but as soon as you start hitting that trauma lane, or as soon as you hear that guy yell for medic or that girl yell for medic, it's all going to come flooding back to you. It just will. It's amazing how that happens. Your fight or flight response comes in. You're gung-ho. You're like, I'm going to save you. This is going to happen. You're going to go over to him. You're going to tell him it's going to be all right. You're going to do what you can, and you're going to get him out of there. And that's all you got to do. You just make sure you're organized. You got all the stuff you need and more. It'll save you a whole lot of heartache, a whole lot of hassle, and a whole lot of mental strain.
That's a great piece of advice. That's a very, very good thing to say, is that you have to have much more than you actually can carry on you. I know it's going to be heavy. I know you're going to be taking on extra weight. I know you're going to be taking on extra bags and extra gear. But having extra equipment on you is absolutely essential, because there's nothing worse than getting stuck when you're working on a patient or you're in a situation and you ran out of supplies. You don't have any combat gauze. You don't have an extra IV bag. You're out of needles, and now you're forced to scavenge for something to use. So just take that initiative, take some extra supplies on you, and carry that on you. Also, when you're getting deployed with a group, it doesn't matter if you're with the SEAL or you're with an infantry unit, whatever. Whoever you're currently deployed with or whoever you're on a mission with, make sure that your team has the proper IFAC supplies that you need. Now, I understand that you have to follow your unit's recommendations or your orders, but just make sure that you have everything that you need, because you're going to be the one saving their life. Yes, they've been trained to stop the bleed. Yes, they've been trained to use tourniquets. They've been trained to do some basic first aid functions. But remember, they're under your responsibility. When you go out with the team, you're the sole provider for them. So just make sure that they're carrying the equipment that you are used to, or that the equipment that they're carrying is something that you've at least practiced with and have used before. Just make sure that you're comfortable with your equipment and you know your team, and you help prepare them so that you guys can all work in sync together, and everything will be hopefully well.
Yeah, and to tack on to what you were saying, if you're right before a deployment, your platoon sergeant or your senior line medic will come up to you and be like, hey, make sure everyone's IFAC is good to go. And when you check everyone, if you see a guy with a can of dip replacing his chest seal, I mean, don't yell at him. Don't make him feel like a child. But that's why you check, because you don't want to be out in the field, whether it be a training accident, like you're training and there's a training accident, and now you need a chest seal, or you're actually deployed, you need a chest seal. You're always going to go to the guy's IFAC first, because that's the medical supplies for him. If he doesn't have it and he just has a can of dip in there, well, now you got to go into your aid bag, take out a chest seal, and use that. That's detracting medical supplies from any other potential casualties. So make it known to them. Like, don't belittle them. Just say, hey, look, you can't do that. You got 12 pockets on your pants and jacket combined. Use one of those pockets to hide your dip. It's really simple. And I say this because it's happened. I've run into guys, they have lickies and chewies, stuffed in crevices, because when you're going on, even if you're just in a training unit, sometimes they go on 2-3 month training rotations, and you don't always get a chance to go to the commissary or the PX or BX if you're Air Force. You don't always get a chance to go to those places. So you stock up before you leave, and then you put it in little crevices where you know where to get them, and boom. Which brings me to another point. Your guys will love you to death if you're carrying around some sort of like Jolly Rancher or a Starburst. Typically something more that lasts longer, like a Jolly Rancher, because when you're, especially on the training rotation, you're out in the field and you're doing nothing, it gets really boring. So they want something to do. Well, hey, here's a stick of gum. Hey, here's a Jolly Rancher. Or for those guys who, just smoke constantly or dip constantly. I know you're supposed to be a medical professional, and you're supposed to try to get them to stop. But honestly, you're not going to get them to stop. So you can always carry, a couple logs of Copenhagen or something, hand it out. If they start coming down, they start having those, nicotine withdrawals, trust me, you're going to wish that you had that can of Copenhagen for them.
Another quick tactic to share with you guys, and this is, again, something that's a little different than you would expect, but is your breathing. When you are a medical professional, when you're a provider, when you're working on a casualty, when you're in a stressful situation, sometimes your nerves can get the best of you and you can freak out a little bit. You can start shaking. You may, your mind might go blank and you may forget what you're doing. Just remember this little breathing technique. I know it's super simple, but it starts off by breathing in for 2 seconds, holding it, breathe out for 2 seconds, hold that. Don't breathe in for 2 more seconds, and then continue the process. So what this is doing is this is getting your heart rate to, maintain itself. You're trying to get yourself relaxed. You're trying to bring your body out of panic mode and into a more focused mode. Do these breathing exercises whenever you're in a stressful situation, and I promise you, if you continue to do them, you'll be able to catch your breath, your heart rate will lower a little bit, and you'll be able to focus on your mission. That is the most critical component of being a medical professional.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of something. I'm not going to be long. When you're doing training, sometimes it's going to suck. But when you're doing your job, you're never having as much fun. Whenever I would have to go on a training rotation, it wasn't that fun because you're just watching all the infantry guys doing something. But then once you get a mock casualty or an actual casualty, you're hyped. You don't want these guys to get hurt, obviously, but once they do, you're just like, I can do my job, and your mind starts racing, and you start thinking, your mechanism of injury, nature of illness, what's going on, and you get out there and you get to do your cool medic stuff, and it's just it's so much fun. I genuinely love being a medic. I can never see myself doing any other kind of job.
Being a medical professional is one of the most rewarding careers, I think, in existence. It's highly recommended to do your research, look into it before you get into the job to make sure if it's for you, because it does take a lot of heart. It does take a lot of responsibility, and it's not going to do you any good if you're just doing it just because it looks cool on TV. You have to genuinely want to help people and make a difference.
And not to put Dan and I up on this, high horse, but it truly does, you'll hear this a lot, it truly does take a special kind of person to be in the medical field, because you're going to see a lot of stuff that you didn't think you were ever going to see, or, you didn't want to see. And some people just don't have the stomach for that. You're going to see blood. If you get queasy at the sight of blood, you're either going to have to overcome that, or that's just not the right job for you. It takes a special person to be able to keep their calm under an intense situation, even if it's a mock casualty. Trust me, the way your sergeants will put you through that trauma lane, it'll feel like the real thing, because you will be so stressed out trying to get everything perfect while they're yelling at you and screaming at you and telling you that you're a terrible medic. And then once they're done and you're done with your trauma lane, they give you constructive criticism. You work on that, you build on that, and you become a better medic.
I don't think we could end it on any better note. So, with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Let's wrap up this episode, Wyatt. Wyatt, thanks for being here on the Dozer Tactical Podcast today. Do you have anything else you'd like to say to our audience?
Well, y'all, if you have any questions regarding anything medical or about the Army, feel free to contact me. I'm over in Italy right now, so you can't really contact me via phone, but I got the Messenger app for Facebook, so look me up on Facebook. It's just Wyatt Copeland. Real easy. Dan is my friend on there, so just look for the Wyatt Copeland that has Dan Mendoza as a friend. And if you have any questions for me regarding what we talked about on this podcast, feel free to ask me. There's plenty of things that I didn't cover, and I'd be more than happy to help. Also, please remember to leave us a review and give us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. How about considering supporting, Dozer Tactical Podcast with a monthly donation? You can do so by selecting the link in the show's description.
Thank you for listening, and tune in next week for more tactical stories and advice. Stay safe and stay prepared. Wyatt, thanks again.